Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Joseph Ryder Anderson podcast. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Sword Art Online Union Arena Rare Battle format. For this episode, we're going to go through every single one of the main decks that are going to be played at the Union Arena Rare Battle for Sword Art Online. We're going to be looking at different strengths and weaknesses of these decks, and we're going to even be diving into some of the matchups that you're going to face. Prioritizing the top meta decks in that format. So just as a reminder, the Union Arena Rare Battle format is a format in which you are locked into building decks with the cards from a single anime. So that means you are only going to be playing against other Sword Art Online decks in the Sword Art Online Rare Battle format. Otherwise, these tournaments work just the same as a regular store tournament. So if you've been to a Union Arena store tournament lately, it'll be the same as that, but you will have unique and exclusive prizes. You'll have exclusive event packs, exclusive cards that you get just for participating. And the real draw is the unique and exclusive Kirito Sword Art Online promo. You get this for top four, for placing the top four, and you get a special winner card that says winner on it. So it's a Kirito Union Rare, is what they call it, promo, with winner stamped on it. Only the first place player gets that winner stamped promo. So it's a huge flex to win that. And lots of people are going to want to be winning that particular Kirito simply because it is for the blue deck. It is the 5-cost blue Kirito that you play in the very popular blue Sword Art Online deck. So let's just dive right into it. It's been a few weeks now since I've sort of had to transition off of Sword Art Online. So I was deep in Sword Art Online, playing all the time, pretty much every day, testing different strategies, playing against friends, testing strategies, going to tournaments to test different decks out. So it was a really raucous time, very fun time. And since then, I've had to transition a bit to the Bleach set that came out, to Black Clover, to the not Union Arena, but the Destined Rival set that came out for Pokemon. So I've had a really good moment to pause and take a step back. And I've definitely seen, whenever I do that, whenever I take a step back and pause for a little bit on playing competitively, I usually come back very refreshed and a lot better than I was before. It's easy to get burned out when you're playing too much. You start trying to look for these perfect plays and perfect lines. And a lot of times it's good to just take a step back and just play and let what happens happen, you know? So I say this after I've gone now 2 tournaments back to back that I've been to, undefeated. The latest was with the Yellow Goddesses deck. So that is been my favorite deck. It was a deck I was super looking forward to. If you've been following my podcast, you probably know that it's arguably my favorite deck in Union Arena right now. And I will say that despite how excited I was for this deck, I had a bit of a tough time picking it up. It took me a while to figure out the way I wanted to build it, the way I wanted to play it. And it plays differently than I thought it would in some ways. Obviously, I understood the main core mechanics, but there's some nuances to how to play it that took me a little while to figure out. For example, I think the biggest one is that it looks like a deck that you play super rushy. And that's the way I played it, is just rushing forward, attacking my opponent whenever possible, raiding whenever possible. And the more I played this deck, the more I've realized how important it is to hold back and not just the way I thought that you would play this deck, Yellow Goddesses, is to just run in, get that early game going so that by the time you get to the late game, you've already done enough damage that you can just close it out. That's not really how this deck works. Really, this deck is you're really looking to just build up your resources until you hit that 4 life left in your life. And then once you hit that is when you start going ham. So you really don't want to be using your best combos or plays until you've already hit that 4 life or less. So it's very tricky to figure out how to use this deck. Another thing too is as you play Goddesses, and we're talking the more just regular store tournament format, you figure out what kinds of decks you can afford to get to like 2 life against in order to leverage your strongest plays via Xenon, and what decks you really don't want to go below 4 if you can help it. And that's a tricky thing to figure out. It takes a lot of practice, but I will say pretty confidently this is one of the strongest decks in the game after having played it for, I don't even know how long it's been, couple months straight now, or at least a month and a half straight of playing a lot of yellow goddesses. So that being said, this is going to be one of the decks you're going to see the most frequently in your Sword Art Online Rare Battle format. You're going to see this deck all over the place. So I don't know how much I want to go into my current list, but I think I will. I think I'll probably spend the most time on goddesses because that's honestly where I have tested every single deck, but goddesses is the one that I've worked the hardest on. So I will go over my list one more time. I did do an earlier podcast on this, but the way I play this deck and the way that I've built it is quite a bit different than it was then. So just going over the cards, you'll see I will link to this in the show notes as usual. But I have 2 Lifa goddesses, 0 cost, the Nullify Impact 0 cost, 2 Yu-Gi-Ohs 0 cost, 4 Asuna 0 cost, and 4 Sinon 0 cost. So that's pretty straightforward. You need the Asunas and the Sinons as raid targets for later, so that's pretty straightforward. The Yu-Gi-Oh at 2 is partly a compromise because he has a trigger, so this helps keep your trigger count to 8, or at least not to 8, but to not going too far over 10. So in this deck, the trigger list count is at 10. An ideal trigger list count tends to be around 8, but I think in this deck 10 is fine for what you get. I did mess around with other kinds of things to try to get that trigger list count down, but what I found is I really like the way this build is now because of how reliable it is at its curve. When I started messing around with things, I got a lot of brick problems. So anyways, pretty straightforward there. Having 2 of the 0 cost Yu-Gi-Ohs, it is somewhat helpful because you can use him to boost some of your characters in a time of need. So that's always nice to have that little tech just in case you need to swing over a character with like 5,000 BP or more. So then we have the 4 1-cost Asunas, and this is one of my favorite cards in the deck. This 1-cost Asuna does not have a trigger, but she does have 2,500 BP at a 1 cost, which is fantastic. And she even boosts to 3,000 if you get down to 4 life or less. So with this deck, you're really just trying to get to 4 life as quickly as possible, and then once you do, hold the line as much as possible, because that's when your deck. That's when you really need to be at 4 for this deck to function properly. You don't want to take too long to get there, because you will lose a lot of the advantages of your effects. In a perfect world, you wouldn't even really be playing your raids until you're at 4 life or less. So that's just how important it is. You do also have the 4 of the 2-cost Sinons. I've gone back and forth about this character. I went from thinking the snipe was crazy strong to realizing the snipe was really kind of niche, to coming back to like, okay, having as much Sinon as possible is really solid because late game you want to have a Sinon on the board that you can raid your 4-cost Sinon with. It is one of the strongest cards in your deck, so you really want to prioritize having a raid target handy that you can raid your Sinon over. So just really important to have those 2 raid targets for it. And sometimes the snipe is handy. You can use that to weaken your opponent's field when they would rather just take a hit. When it's more advantageous for them to take a hit, you can use that snipe to weaken their field and remove different strategic targets. I am running 4 and 4 of the Lisbeth and Asuna. These are the 2 energy gen characters. Lisbeth is just so solid. The fact that, because this deck, you're really leaning heavily on your goddess raid cards, so you want to use that Lisbeth to find them. And it also helps that she has 2 energy gen, so she can help you just have the energy you need to pull off a lot of different plays. That's one thing that's nice about this deck. It's only a 4 energy deck, so just running 2 full sets of a 2 energy gen character means that you have a lot of flexibility to play a bunch of raids in a turn, which really helps with closing out games. And of course, you have this super powerful 3-cost Asuna. When played, take a card from your life, take a card on top of your deck, or draw a card on top of your deck. Really good way to gain resources. And moving on from that, the 4-cost Lifa. 4 of those, such a strong card. Such a strong card. So many useful plays. She's a great way to thin out your life to try to get to that 4 or less. And she's a great way to slow down your opponent and stall out your opponent. I was just using her in the battle today, where I used her to block 2 different Lifas when I used her wind plate effect to block two different attacks from two different air cavalry, or no, I guess it was the same air cavalry, Lancelot air cavalry. But that's just insane. They can't do anything to get rid of her, and then she's blocking out 5k attackers. Such a strong card. Then you have the Raid Asuna, and she really, as I've come to realize, I would use her a lot early game, and there are some times when it's helpful to use her early game. You can use her to get rid of a lockdown, or not lockdown, but to pull up like a character that, like a tap to resting character. So like for like a Euphemia for Lancelot, if you can use her to really draw up characters that are super unstrategic for your opponent to have on the front line, she's great. Otherwise, you really don't want to be playing her again until you're at 4 life or less, because she's just not that effective. She can punch some holes. So if you're playing a really aggressive game and you've managed to get a lot of characters onto your board early and you're just rushing down your opponent, she can be great at opening up more holes in your opponent's defenses, but ultimately she's going to be at her most strategic when you're at 4 life or less, because then when she switches characters, they are unable to move back up. This was super effective in a game today I did against Yellow Bleach, where they were playing, my opponent was playing the Giselle, I think is his name, onto the front line. That character can only activate his effect when he's on the front line, so just bumping him back and switching him out with the character on the energy line really slowed that deck down. So there's just some decks that really struggle against this swapping play, and not all decks do, and that's fine, because the switch to resting can still be super helpful to open up holes in your opponent's defenses. And then your strongest card is definitely the Xenon Goddess card. So she gains boost to 4,000 BP, has impact and snipe as long as you're at 2 cards, and she has you have to read the card because it's varying degrees. At 4 cards she can gain snipe, at 3 cards she gains snipe and plus 500 BP, and then at 2 cards or less in your life she gains impact as well. So she is just, I have learned sort of the hard way, because again I used to want to play this deck very rushy and very aggressive, and I just have learned that you just really, unless if you just, there's no other way, and you're just stuck in a scenario. Like for example, like today I was playing from behind where in the tournament that I won, I was playing from behind where I bricked very badly, and then I got a Xenon off a life to raid, and I just had to raid her. First of all, I had 2 more Xenon Goddesses in my hand, so it wasn't a big deal, but I had to raid her to just slow my opponent down to block. So there are scenarios where you do need to raid this without taking advantage of like her snipe and her impact and all that, but you really want to be using her to take those removals late game, preferably at 2 life or less. But there are obviously instances where you can use her when you have less life, even though you won't have the full impact capabilities. So this deck is crazy. I will also say unlimited landscape manipulation. I have played around with decks with this strategy, played around decks with not, and today I was super happy I had it. I think what made me add it back in was taking a look at that deck that's super popular in the regular format, which is the Royal Palace in the Bleach Purple Squad Zero deck. So I think there's going to be a lot of people playing that deck and a lot of people running that site. So having a card that can sideline a site just feels super meta relevant right now. And it came in tons of handy today when playing against Lancelot. I was able to use it to get rid of that trailer card and pretty much slow my opponent down. So I've just talked about a lot of matchups there from my firsthand experience today, but I think what we really care about is not the store tournament format for this podcast. We really are focused on how this deck does against the other decks in the store in the Union Arena Rare Battle format. And I can say that against GGO, definitely you have a distinct advantage against GGO. You can move much faster, much earlier than GGO. You can, if they are leaving characters with 1 energy on their energy line, which they tend to in that deck, you can lock down plenty of strong characters. You can lock down that 5,000 BP Kirito and render him somewhat useless. And it's just the combination of your strength and speed is just higher than the GGO deck. So I really like this matchup. I really like that play into GGO, where you can again bring up that 1 cost character that 1 energy gen character that taps to Resty if they're playing that. Or yeah, that's my favorite play to use against any green deck, so you can use that early on. Also, if they're using the buggy card, which works the same as that card in Lancelot, your unlimited landscape manipulation ability is going to be really effective to shut that buggy card down. So I really like Goddesses versus GGO. I have tested it quite a bit and definitely have found that Goddesses has the advantage in that particular matchup. One thing, I've said this before, but something to really pay attention to in that matchup is that Sinon can pretty reliably snipe your Lifa. So this is something that we found out from testing, is that snipe works on Lifa. Lifa has this one plate effect that basically makes it so she can't be chosen by just about anything. But snipe doesn't count towards that because you're not choosing, you're targeting. I guess that means two very different things in Union Arena. So you can be sniped even if you play your Lifa booster to 6,000 BP. GGO Sinon does have that Hecate special, which can boost her by a lot. Plus Kirito can also grant BP boosts to her. So you really don't want to play Lifa thinking that she's going to be a foolproof strategy because essentially she can't be sniped. So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean you can never play her, but just something to keep in mind when playing against GGO. Versus Blue SAO, I have not had trouble against Blue SAO with Goddesses. There was one that I did lose, actually, where I had a pretty good start, but they were just able to get tons of removal and tons of their combo set up. And otherwise, I find it a pretty decent matchup. And most of the battles I've done against Blue SAO, you could just pretty much shut down. If you can shut down some of their key pieces early on, it's very hard for them to come back from that. If you freeze down their 5-cost Kirito early on and just lock that character down on the energy line, just focus, know what the key pieces are to Blue SAO, like that 5-cost Kirito especially, and know to lock them down, get rid of them. Then you have a lot more versatility. You are less reliant on having a bunch of pieces. Really, you're not reliant on having a bunch of pieces at all in this deck. That's probably why it's so good. It's very flexible, whereas Blue SAO is one of those decks that needs to have a setup and get its combos off in order to take advantage of all those multi-attacks. I will say if it does get into a rhythm where it's getting off multiple attacks and tons of attacks in a turn, it's extremely hard to beat that deck. And that's why that deck is one of the top Union Arena decks in general. But I do think Yellow Goddess has the favored matchup as long as you know what you're looking for. Moving on to Integrity Knights. This one is interesting because when I was originally building Goddesses, Integrity Knights was not on my radar as a problem deck. And it took me quite a bit of practice to figure out how to play against this deck because it can totally take you by surprise. So essentially, your strategies are so different. And what you're doing can really help Integrity Knights out, largely because of that 2 AP cost Kirito. So you can be against most other decks, you can get down to 4 life and you have plenty of tools. You have the Lifa, you have the Nullify Impact, you have all these powerful cards. You have plenty of tools to stop your opponent from going too much further. But the one thing that you are not good at stopping is a double attacker. So it's very hard. They can totally work around you with that double attacker. Plus the removal. If they manage to get too much removal on you early on before you are able to hit that 4 life or less, then they can take you down. Your advantage, on the other hand, is you have a way stronger late game. So if you do manage to hang in there and not just get obliterated against Integrity Knights, your late game is way stronger. You can snipe, you can lock characters down, you can focus on those named characters that are going to be the biggest problem and get rid of them. You just have to think very hard about what character is going to be the biggest problem at any given time. You have to study what those effects do if you don't know them. For example, Kirito needs an Alice and a Yu-Gi-Oh on the field to have a double attack, whereas Alice needs the Yu-Gi-Oh and the Kirito on the field to remove a 4K body. So you have to really play the probabilities and odds to focus your energy on getting rid of these named characters and focus on which combos are going to be the least problematic. It's a very hard matchup and very tense. In our matchup today against one of my local players who plays Integrity Knights very well, it was just a nail biter for both of us up to the very end. And I was way behind too, which weirdly enough helped me because I tend to play I tend to want to play Goddesses more aggressively than you should. And so I was going against Integrity Knights today. And one thing that actually weirdly helped me is I bricked pretty hard in the beginning. So hard that I really thought I was going to lose because I was down to like 4 life. But what happened is once I got down to 4 life and I had this handful of cards because I've been bricking, so I've been building up a hand, And then once I actually started being able to play my cards, I could just play so many cards at once, and they were all really strong cards, right? They were all really strong, much stronger cards than Integrity Knights has access to. But again, you have to be at 4 life or less. So again, I think this matchup really just calls to mind the main pros and cons of Goddesses, which is it is a high risk, high reward deck. So yeah, you do become incredibly strong at 4 life or less, but 4 life or less can definitely be a problem against certain kinds of decks, and Integrity Knights is one of them. So you really don't want to be messing around and purposely getting below 4. If you against Integrity Knights, you hit 4, you're not using any more of your effects. You're not drawing cards with Asana, unless if you just gain a huge advantage. But you're not doing that. You're not drawing cards. You're not taking a life from your own life with Leafa either. You're just getting to 4, and you're trying to hold the line at 4. So that's my best advice I can give you against Integrity Knights. And then there's Mother's Rosario. Super interesting matchup. I definitely prefer Goddesses, but Mother's Rosario, again, we'll talk about this more and more. Mother's Rosario, I would say, is the dark horse of the Sword Art Online Rare Battle format, because Mother's Rosario actually has decent matchups against all the other decks. It doesn't have any bad matchup. But Mother's Rosario is even more heavily late game sort of a deck than Goddesses is, because it really doesn't have much it can do earlier game. It's really trying to build up. It's trying to stall out your opponent, build up to all the Yukis you have in your sideline, and it's trying to then win in a couple of turns via your Asana, because she's your main powerhouse card. Your Asana are also that 2-action Yuki. So I like this matchup fine for Goddesses. You can freeze down that Yuki, that when it switches to resting, when it sidelines, you switch to opponent's character resting. So you can kind of nullify that. So it ends up being a decent matchup for you for Goddesses. It's not one I would super worry about, but again, if they're able to build up their board with a bunch of Asanas and then get all their Yukis in their sideline, that deck can turn crazy scary. I did have a match where that happened, where I was playing against Goddesses actually with Mother's Rosario, and it was tough. It was tight, and they were ahead. But again, I got that scenario where I got like 2 or 3 different of my raid Asanas out, and I hit that threshold, and I was just swinging for 2 damage with every attack, plus can't be blocked by 3k or less. So it can be scary, but I think that your condition of getting to 4 life or less is easier than the condition that Mother's Rosario needs in order to win. With that being said, we'll talk a bit more about Mother's Rosario. Mother's Rosario does have some better matchups in some other cases, so we'll talk about that more in a second. But let's move on now. We've talked about just about every matchup that we need to talk about for Yellow Goddesses. Actually, let's go and talk about that matchup that I was going to highlight for Mother's Rosario. And that one matchup that I do find is pretty decent, surprisingly, is that Mother's Rosario does go well into Integrity Knights. It doesn't have the same weakness where you're, removing your own life. So Integrity Knights isn't as damaging against you. With that Kirito, the 2-cost Kirito double attack isn't a huge deal. You can also run the Klein double block, and then the 2-cost Yuki that grants 1,000 BP when sidelined to nullify that Kirito double attack. So it does really well into Integrity Knights. So I don't know if you're expecting to run into a bunch of Integrity Knights. Mother's Rosario, I would say, has a little bit of a more favorable matchup against Integrity Knights than Goddesses, which can struggle in the matchup, just because that early to mid game is stronger for Integrity Knights. But yeah, Mother's Rosario is pretty solid, I would say. Otherwise, it has a particularly even matchup against the rest of the decks. It's really just coming down to how many Yukis you can get in your sideline. But I think if a player is playing and piloting this deck in the Rare Battle format and really knows what they're doing, I think they can pull off a lot of shenanigans, because lots of people aren't going to be used to playing against this deck. It saw a little bit of play when Sword Art Online came out, but it certainly fell off the radar. So I think a lot of people just won't be familiar with how deadly that Asuna can get when she is fully powered up, and it's pretty surprising. Moving on to GGO, I think GGO is going to be a tough pick in the Rare Battle format. And I say that, it's funny I say that, because I thought I always kind of held GGO as one of the best decks, and I do think it does better in the regular format. I think in this rare battle format, it's gonna struggle against how much faster the other decks are than it. So yeah, if you can really bank on hitting your curve and reaching those combos, then you're going to be able to do a lot of things that the other decks just aren't going to be able to do in terms of removal, in terms of like impact attacks and things like that. But you're just going to have to bank on hitting that curve before you get too weakened. It doesn't matter. So I think that that's the main pro and con. It has one of the strongest high end powers of any deck. Some of the strongest combos of any deck in the SAO Rare Battle format, but it's just up to you whether or not you think that you can manage the curve, I guess. Like whether or not you think that you can make that late game payoff work for you despite having the early game, the slower early game. And then there is really, we'll talk about Integrity Knights. Again, we've already talked about Integrity Knights a bit in the matchup versus Yellow Goddesses, but Integrity Knights is, I would say, the most middle of the road pick. It's the most balanced pick. So if you're not sure what to play and you want to play something that just functions really well, is really reliable, has solid removal, does well into all the other decks, has, really strong early to middle of the gameplay, and plus some closing power with the Kirito and the Yu-Gi-Oh! As well as some really strong defensive capabilities. I mean, Integrity Knights is your safest bet in the rare battle format. So unlike some of these other decks that have some pretty strong drawbacks, so with Goddesses you have the fact that you could just get killed because you're at 4 life or less for most of the game, or the fact that Mother's Rosario doesn't function super well unless if it hits all 8 Yukis in the sideline, which happens sometimes, doesn't happen sometimes, or the GGO deck that if you can build up your energy curve reliably early, you can pull off a lot of crazy combos. Or the blue SAO that needs a lot of specific pieces in place to get off all of its crazy multi-attacks. If all of those crazy drawbacks don't sound like a ton of fun to you, if they sound a little risky, Integrity Knights might be the deck for you, because it's not like that. It's what you might consider a mid-range deck. It's not super aggro. It's not control. It's not a combo deck. You're just coming out, removing characters, swinging for impact, coming in with the Kirito. It's a very straightforward deck, with the biggest sort of tricky play being the Yu-Gi-Oh! That can grant BP and nullify impact. The weird thing is that does not come up as often as you'd think, and I don't know that that's the most important thing in the rare battle format. I think that that's more handy in the store tournament format with like the likes of Saitama, with the likes of Saitama running around, things like that. I think the Yu-Gi-Oh! Win sideline ability is not quite as helpful in the rare battle format. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. The blue SAO deck, it's funny that I haven't spent more time on this, but in some ways I just feel like I don't have to. This deck is really the most popular SAO deck, so I don't feel like it's the one you're gonna see a lot. It's not one that worries me personally too much, just because I know how to play against it. So I'm mostly just looking to disrupt and shut down those key characters. And I think the most key character is that 5-cost Kirito. You really just want to shut him down whenever possible. Otherwise, you are not really. Otherwise, I think that a lot of these decks have a decent matchup against this deck, right? Because Blue SAO does not have any removal. It's looking to get a ton of multi-attacks in. So, again, that can be a problem, same way as the 2 action point Kirito is a problem in Integrity Knights. That could be a problem for Yellow Goddesses, because if you get to that point in the game, and even though you might have lots of powerful characters on board, if they can just multi-attack through you, that could definitely be a problem. But it's the same with any other deck too. If they're able to multi-attack through you with all these combos, that's going to be a problem. But it is probably the strongest deck in Sword Art Online. As funny as that sounds, because I did not think that. Just looking at it on paper, it didn't feel like it. But it's had probably the most consistent results competitively out of all the other decks. So I would say it's probably the deck you're going to play against the most. So I would definitely recommend practicing against it, figuring out like how the different combos work together, figuring out what to look for, knowing like what cards to shut down when and why. It's all important things. I think weirdly enough, the Raid Kirito from the starter deck isn't as big of a threat, because once he's played, that once you get to a point where you can actually actively get rid of him, he's lost his effectiveness, right? He's lost his when played. So you're really looking at that 5-cost Kirito and just trying to manage the potential onslaught of those characters. Nullify Impact can go a long ways against this deck because you do have 2 powerful impact attackers in the form of Asuna, the 2 different Asunas, the 2 different 4-cost Asunas that have impact. So keeping your Nullify Impacts on board to stop those, at least late game, can be helpful. And freezing, locking your opponent down is a great thing to do. I'd say Goddesses goes particularly well into blue SAO because you have kind of an anti-blue SAO move in the form of the 4-cost Asuna that can just shut characters down on the energy lines that they can't move up. And there's no card in that deck that can stop that. So definitely some really powerful plays there. Anyways, to sum it up, and the Sparks Notes edition of how to choose what deck to play in your SAO Rare Battle format. Choose Integrity Knights if you want the most balanced deck. Choose Mother's Rosario if you really don't mind risking it all for that powerful end of game play with Asuna. Choose Blue SAO if you want the deck that functions the strongest, assuming it has all of its pieces. Go with GGO if you want the late game power of that deck but don't mind the slower speed to start. Go with Yellow Goddesses if you are confident in your ability to win without low life and that risk doesn't trouble you. And go with Blue ALO if you're just playing for laughs because that deck's probably not a serious contender in the Rare Battle format. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you have your own thoughts or ideas about things you want to hear about in future podcasts, or you want to share your own decks and experiences, the best way to do that is by joining my Discord. You can find that on my website, very prominently in the menu on my website, or other places too. The Discord is a great way to connect with me. You can connect with me on X, and I'm looking forward to hearing how your Rare Battle tournaments with SAO go. Thanks so much, and talk to you next time.